right, let's get into it. You are not going to believe this, folks. Stay with me, because the story of my great-grandpa Alistair, who would be 107 this year if he were still with us, and what we found out after all these decades, well, it'll knock your socks clean off. I mean, I always knew there was something different about the stories surrounding him, but I never, in my wildest dreams, figured it'd be something this monumental. We all thought he just up and left, a black sheep, you know, but the truth? Lord have mercy. The truth was a whole other kettle of fish. My name is Arthur, Artie to my friends, and I've seen a fair few seasons come and go, let me tell you. 68 years on this earth, and you think you've heard it all, seen it all, especially within your own family. But life, she has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Usually when you're just trying to sort through your dearly departed Grandma Millie's knickknacks. That's where this whole shebang kicked off, see? Grandma Millie, bless her heart, lived to the ripe old age of 92, sharp as a tack till the very end, though she got a bit particular in her later years. She was my dad's mom, and her father was the infamous Alistair McGregor. Now, Alistair, he was a whisper in our family, a ghost at the dinner table we never really talked about. The official story, the one trotted out for curious kids like me back in the day, was that he was a bit of a rover, a charming rogue who just couldn't be tied down. Said he fought in the war, which war nobody ever specified, came back changed, and then one day, poof, vanished. Left his wife, my great-grandma Ilara, and their young son, my grandpa Thomas, to fend for themselves. This was way back. Mind you, probably in the late 1940s, early 50s, as far as we could piece together. Great-grandma Ilara, bless her stoic soul, never remarried, never spoke ill of him, but never really spoke of him much either. It was like he was a closed chapter, locked away and the key thrown into the deepest ocean. So there we were, my son Michael, his wife Sarah, and me, wading through 70 years of accumulated stuff in Grandma Millie's little bungalow. Every closet, every drawer, every dusty box in the attic was a trip down memory lane. Old photographs, report cards, costume jewelry that probably wasn't worth a dime but held a million memories for her. We were about ready to call it a day, hands grimy, backs aching, when Michael, who's got an eye for detail, noticed something odd about the old cedar chest at the foot of Grandma Millie's bed. "Dad," he said, wiping his brow. "This chest. It's got a false bottom, I think." Now, I'd seen that chest my whole life. It's where Grandma kept her good linens, the ones that only came out for Christmas or Easter. Smelled of cedar and mothballs, a scent that just screamed, Grandma's. "Houses to me," I told him. "Nonsense, son, that's just a solid old chest. They built things to last back then. But Michael, he's persistent like his mother, God rest her soul. He fiddled with it, pressed here, tapped there, and darned if he wasn't right. A section of the bottom, cleverly disguised, popped up with a faint click. And underneath, not linens, not mothballs. It was a smaller, flat wooden box, dark with age, bound with a brittle leather strap. No keyhole, just that strap. "Well, I'll be," I muttered, feeling a prickle run up my spine. It was like something out of an old adventure movie. Sarah leaned in, her eyes wide. "What do you think is in it, Artie?" "Could be anything, love," I said, trying to sound nonchalant, but my heart was thumping a bit. "Old love letters, maybe. Some savings she squirreled away. Your Grandma Millie was a bit of a magpie." We carried it into the kitchen, the afternoon sun slanting through the window, dust motes dancing in the light. The leather strap crumbled in my fingers when I tried to unbuckle it. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, were a few items. A small, very old-looking journal, its pages yellow and brittle. A handful of letters tied with a faded ribbon, the ink on the envelope spidery and faded. And a medal, not like any military medal I'd ever seen. It was heavy, bronze-colored, with strange symbols on it. No king or queen, no eagle, nothing recognizable. "What in the world?" Michael breathed, picking up the medal. I reached for the journal. The leather cover was cracked, the paper inside so fragile I was almost afraid to touch it. The handwriting was small, precise, but definitely a man's hand. And the first words I could make out on the open page sent a shiver straight through me. Operation Nightingale is a go. My heart is heavy leaving Alara and Thomas, but duty calls. If I don't make it back, I pray they understand. Lara and Thomas, my great-grandmother and my grandfather. This had to be Alistair's. But Operation Nightingale? I'd never heard of it. And what kind of duty makes a man abandon his family, then makes his own wife and daughter keep his belongings hidden under a false bottom for 70-odd years? We looked at each other, the three of us. It felt like we'd stumbled onto something big, something that had been deliberately buried. Back in my day, I began, then stopped. This wasn't about my day. This was about a day long before mine, a day that had shaped our family in ways we were only just beginning to glimpse. Michael picked up one of the letters. The postmark was faint, but he managed to read it. It's not from around. Here, Dad, the stamp, the postmark. It looks foreign, but I can't quite make it out, and it's addressed to Millie, not Alara. To Grandma Millie? Why would Alistair write to his daughter-in-law, the wife of the son he'd supposedly abandoned, and not his own wife or son? Was this before he disappeared, or after? My head was spinning. Could it be that Grandma Millie knew more than she ever let on? That she was a keeper of secrets, not just Linen's? The journal was clearly Alistair's. The few entries we dared to peek at were cryptic, talking about the package, the rendezvous, the extraction. It sounded like spy talk, something straight out of a Cold War thriller, not the ramblings of some restless family man from a small town. And that metal, it felt important, heavy with unspoken history. We need to read these, Sarah said, her voice hushed. Carefully. We spent the rest of that evening, and well into the night, poring over those documents. The journal entries were sporadic, sometimes weeks apart, hinting at clandestine meetings in fog-shrouded European cities I'd only read about in books. The letters to Millie, well, they were even more puzzling. They were dated after Alistair was supposed to have vanished. They spoke of his love for his family, his regret, his hope that one day they would understand. But they were also full of warnings. Don't try to find me. It's safer this way. Tell no one. Lord have mercy. What had this man gotten himself into? This wasn't a simple case of a fella skipping town. This was something else entirely, something dangerous. And the secret war mentioned in the title of this story, it was starting to feel very, very real. The family legend of the charming rogue was crumbling, replaced by the image of a man caught in a web far bigger and more terrifying than any of us could have imagined. He wasn't just a runaway. He was running from something, or for something. The last letter in the bundle, the one on the very bottom, was different. It was in a different envelope, slightly thicker, and it wasn't addressed to Millie. It was addressed to my dearest Alara, but it had clearly never been sent. It was as if he'd written it, then had second thoughts, or maybe couldn't find a safe way to get it to her. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was a confession, a plea for forgiveness and a promise. He wrote about a sacred trust he couldn't betray, about enemies who would stop at nothing. He begged her to believe he hadn't abandoned them out of selfishness, but out of a desperate need to protect them. And then, tucked into the fold of that last letter, was a small sepia-toned photograph. It was Alistair, looking younger, maybe in his late 20s, handsome as the devil, they always said. He was in some sort of uniform, but not one I recognized. And standing next to him, her hand resting on his arm, was a woman. A beautiful woman with dark, intense eyes and a small, enigmatic smile. And folks, I swear on my grave, that woman was not my great-grandma Alara. My jaw just about hit the floor. Who in the Sam Hill was this woman? And what was she doing with my great-grandfather, looking like they were more than just acquaintances? While he was supposedly married to Alara back home, this wasn't just a secret war anymore. This was a secret life. And just when I thought we were getting some answers, we'd only unearthed a hornet's nest of new questions. What we found next, well, let's just say it made everything else look like child's play. You won't believe what happened next. Seriously, if someone had told me this story a year ago, I'd have said they were spinning yarns taller than Paul Bunyan. But seeing that photograph, it was like a punch to the gut. Here we were thinking, Alistair was some kind of unsung hero, a secret agent sacrificing himself for God and country, and then bam. Another woman. Was he a bigamist? A scoundrel after all? Or was there even more to this than we could possibly fathom? My mind was racing, like a runaway train. Hold on, Michael said, ever the pragmatist, though I could see he was just as flabbergasted as I was. Let's not jump to conclusions. This photo could be from before he met great-grandma Lara, or maybe she was a colleague, part of this Operation Nightingale. Sarah, bless her, was already squinting at the back of the photograph. There's something written here, she announced, her voice tight with anticipation. It's faded, but I think it says Annalise Paris, 1946. Paris, 1946. Okay, so that timing, my grandpa Thomas was born in 43. So, Alistair was definitely married to Alara by then. This Annalise, whoever she was, had entered the picture while he was a husband and father. Lord have mercy. This was getting complicated. Was this the reason? He disappeared, a clandestine affair that went sideways? But then, what about all that talk of duty, of protecting his family, of secret operations? It didn't quite add up. Unless Annalise was part of the operation. We need to find out more about this Operation Nightingale, I declared, feeling a surge of determination. And this medal. It's got to mean something. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights on the computer, calls to military historians, who mostly scratched their heads at Operation Nightingale, and careful readings and rereadings of Alistair's journal and letters. The journal was the most tantalizing. It mentioned code names, drop points, phrases like the asset is secure and extraction compromised. It painted a picture of a shadowy world, post-WT Europe, a landscape still reeling from conflict but already caught in the nascent chills of the Cold War. It seemed Alistair was some kind of operative, involved in spiriting people or information across newly hardening borders. People who perhaps the official channels couldn't or wouldn't help. The medal remained a mystery. We took photos, sent them to experts, numismatists, collectors. Nothing. It was like it didn't exist in any official record. One old fella, a retired professor of European history Michael found online, suggested it might be from a partisan group, or a small, short-lived resistance cell that was never formally recognized. Many such groups awarded their own commendations, my boy, he'd written back. Lost to time, most of them. And Annalise? We hit a brick wall there, too, at first. Annalise Paris, 1946, wasn't much to go on. But then Sarah, who's got a knack for genealogical research from tracing her own family tree, had a brainwave. What if Alistair wasn't his only name? We looked back at the letters to Millie. He never signed them Alistair. He used a symbol, a stylized bird, a nightingale. We realized with a jolt, and in one letter he'd mentioned almost in passing, "Life under the elms is peaceful, though I miss the Scottish pines." Elms? There weren't many elms where great-grandpa Alistair supposedly grew up. This was where my own father, Tom Jr., we weren't very original with names back then, got involved. He's a bit younger than me, more of a quiet type, always preferred his books to people. But when I told him what we'd found, his eyes lit up with a rare spark. He remembered great-grandma Lara talking, just once, about Alistair having connections in France from before the war. He'd apparently spent a summer there as a young man, working on a vineyard, or so the story went. Dad pulled out an ancient, dog-eared address book that had belonged to his father, Grandpa Thomas. And there, under M for McGregor, was Alistair's name. And then, in fainter pencil, almost an afterthought, A. Dubois, Lorme, France. Lorme, French for the elm, Could it be? Did Alistair have an alias? Was he MacGregor in Scotland and America and Dubois in France? The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that was both thrilling and terrifying. If he was living under an assumed name, involved in secret operations, then the woman, Annalise, might very well have been a comrade in arms, or someone he was tasked to protect or extract. Michael, bless his tech-savvy heart, went to work. Alistair. Dubois, Annalise, Paris, 1946. Operation Nightingale. He typed and clicked, cross-referencing, diving into declassified archives, French resistance forums, anything he could find. For days, nothing. Then, a hit. A tiny, obscure academic paper on unofficial Allied support for anti-Soviet networks in Eastern Europe, immediately post-WE2. It mentioned a highly covert, multinational cell codenamed Le Chant des Rossignols, the Song of the Nightingales. Their task? To rescue scientists, artists, and political dissidents from behind what was fast becoming the Iron Curtain and get them to safety in the West. It was dangerous, unsanctioned, and its members often operated under deep cover, sometimes with multiple identities. "This is it," Michael breathed, his face pale in the glow of the monitor. "This has to be it. Le Chant des Rossignols, Operation Nightingale." The paper mentioned that the cell was largely composed of individuals who had wartime experience in intelligence or special operations, often with linguistic skills. Alistair, with his supposed summer in France, might have spoken French. It also said the cell was ruthlessly hunted by Soviet agents and their sympathizers in the West. Members who were compromised often had to disappear permanently, severing all ties to protect their families and the network. Suddenly, Alistair's warnings in the letters to Millie made a chilling kind of sense. He wasn't just being dramatic. He was genuinely afraid. If he was Alistair MacGregor and A. Dubois, then he had at least two identities, two lives. And Annalise. The paper mentioned that operatives often worked in pairs, sometimes posing as married couples for cover. So Annalise might not have been a lover, I said slowly, a wave of relief washing over me, quickly followed by a fresh wave of apprehension. She could have been his partner. Or both, Sarah added quietly, ever the realist. Those were desperate times. People did what they had to do. But the biggest bombshell was yet to come. Dad, Tom Jr., who'd been quietly sifting through more of Grandpa Thomas's old papers, things Grandma Millie had given him years ago, let out a sudden gasp. He was holding a very thin, almost translucent airmail envelope, postmarked from somewhere in Switzerland in the mid-1950s. It was addressed to Grandpa Thomas, but it had clearly been opened and resealed. I remember this, Dad stammered. When I was a boy, maybe 10 or 11, I found this hidden in Dad's sock drawer. He caught me with it and, well, he got angrier than I'd ever seen him. Told me to never touch it again, that it was dangerous nonsense. Inside was a single sheet of flimsy paper. The handwriting was Alistair's. It was short, almost a plea. He wrote that he was safe, but could never come home. He said he'd established a new perch, and that one day, when the storms have passed, he hoped Thomas would understand. He urged Thomas to be a good man, to look after Alara. And then, the line that made all of us catch our breath. I have enclosed a small token, something to remember that not all birds sing the same song, but all songs can be beautiful. Perhaps one day your own fledglings will seek out the other nest. A token. There was nothing else in the envelope. Dad looked confused. He always said it was empty when he found it. He thought maybe the token got lost in the mail, or his father Thomas took it out. "Wait a minute," Michael said, his eyes darting to the wooden box still on the kitchen table. Grandma Millie. She kept this letter hidden from her own husband Thomas, or Thomas gave it to her to keep safe. It seemed more likely Millie had intercepted it, or Thomas, in his anger and confusion, had given it to his wife, unable to deal with it himself. And the token. My gaze fell upon that strange, unidentifiable metal. Could that be the token Alistair mentioned? Sent not with this letter, perhaps, but in one of the earlier ones to Millie, the ones we'd already found. It seemed plausible. She was the keeper of his secrets after all. But that phrase, "Your own fledglings will seek out the other nest." What other nest? Was he talking about Annalise? Did he start a new family with her? The idea, which we'd briefly dismissed, came roaring back. If Annalise wasn't just a colleague, if their cover as a couple had become real. Sarah, ever practical, pointed to the photograph again. Look at her eyes, Artie. Look at the way she's looking at him. That's not just a colleague. And she was right. There was an intimacy there, a deep affection that transcended a mere working relationship. My great-grandfather, the man who disappeared, the secret agent, had he found love again, a new life, while my great-grandmother waited and my grandfather grew up wondering? The thought was staggering. If there was another nest, that meant cousins, another branch of the McGregor or Dubois family tree we never knew existed. If this is true, Michael said, his voice barely a whisper, then we might have relatives out there. In France, maybe, or Switzerland, given that last letter's postmark? The implications were enormous. All these years we thought our family story was straightforward, albeit with a missing piece. Now, it felt like we were standing on the edge of a vast, uncharted territory. Great-Grandpa Alistair wasn't just a man of secrets, he was a man of multiple lives. And just as we were grappling with this, Dad, still sifting through Grandpa Thomas's box, pulled out one last crumpled piece of paper. It wasn't a letter. It looked like a page torn from a ledger or an official document. It was in French, and at the top, clearly typed, was the name Alistair Dubois, and below it, Annalise Dubois, née Vasseur. And then, two more names with dates of birth. Jean-Luc Dubois, born 1948, Sophie Dubois, born 1950. Lord have mercy. He hadn't just found a new love. He'd started a whole new family. My grandfather had half-siblings he never knew. And I had aunts or uncles, cousins out there in the world, completely unaware of our existence, just as we were of theirs. The shock of it left me speechless. That was the last straw for my composure. I had to sit down. All this time, hidden away, was proof of another life, another family. And what that discovery led to next. Well, if you think this is something, just you wait. Well, folks, finding that piece of paper with the names Jean-Luc and Sophie Dubois, it was like a bomb had gone off in Grandma Millie's quiet kitchen. My own grandfather, Thomas, had a half-brother and a half-sister he never knew about. My father had an uncle and aunt he'd never met. And me? I had cousins, maybe even second cousins by now, scattered somewhere in Europe. The world suddenly felt a whole lot bigger and our family history a whole lot messier. I tell you, I needed a stiff drink after that. But it was only mid-afternoon, so I settled for a strong cup of tea, my hand shaking so much I nearly spilled it. So what do we do now? Michael asked, looking from me to his grandfather, my dad, Tom Jr. His eyes were shining with a mixture of shock and, I think, a bit of excitement. Young people, eh? Always ready for an adventure. Dad, usually so reserved, was visibly moved. All these years, my father, Thomas, he must have suspected. That letter Alistair sent him, the one about the other nest. He must have known, deep down. But maybe he couldn't face it. Or maybe, he added thoughtfully, he didn't want to upset Alara further. Or even Millie. That made a certain kind of sense. Back in those days, things were different. Family honor, reputation. They meant a lot. The idea of a man abandoning his wife and child to start a new family, even under extraordinary circumstances like being a secret agent on the run, would have been a terrible scandal, a deep shame. Perhaps Grandpa Thomas chose silence to protect his mother's dignity and his own. Or maybe, as Dad suggested, he just couldn't bear the weight of it all. What you don't know can't hurt you, as the old saying goes, though in this case it seemed what we didn't know had left a huge gaping hole in our understanding of who we were. Sarah, bless her practical heart, was already back on the laptop. "If these births were registered, there might be records online," she murmured, fingers flying across the keyboard. Dubois is a common name, but Alistair Dubois, Annalise Vasseur, that's more specific, especially with birth years for Jean-Luc and Sophie. We spent the next few days in a kind of daze, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, digging deeper into this newfound French connection. The Operation Nightingale angle had given us context for Alistair's disappearance, but the revelation of a second family had made it intensely personal. This wasn't just about a long-lost great-grandfather's secret missions anymore. It was about living, breathing relatives, people who shared our blood. And you know what? Sarah, that girl's a marvel. After countless dead ends and navigating French genealogical websites that made my head spin, she found them. Or at least she found Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc Dubois, born in Lyon, France in 1948. His mother was listed as Annalise Vasseur, his father as Alistair Dubois. Profession unknown. There was even a more recent address for him, in a small village in the Alsace region near the German border. "He's still alive," Sarah whispered, her face illuminated by the screen. "Jean-Luc Dubois. He'd be, what? In his early 70s. Now." My heart hammered against my ribs. An uncle. A French uncle. It was almost too much to take in. What would he be like? Would he even know about us? About his father's first family back in America? Did Alistair ever tell them? So many questions. And only one way to get answers. "We have to contact him," I said, the words out of my mouth before I'd even fully processed the thought. "We have to." Dad nodded slowly. I think your grandfather Thomas would have wanted that, eventually. That phrase in Alistair's letter? Perhaps one day your own fledglings will seek out the other nest. Maybe we are those fledglings. The decision was made. Michael, who speaks a bit of rusty college French, drafted a careful, tentative email. He explained who we were, what we'd found, the box, the journal, the letters, the photograph of Alistair and Annalise. He didn't want to overwhelm this stranger, this Jean-Luc, with all the cloak and dagger stuff right away. He just focused on the family connection, the shared father. He attached a scan of the photo of Alistair and Annalise, and one of Alistair with great-grandma Alara and a very young Grandpa Thomas. Then, with a deep breath, he hit send. The waiting was agony. Every ping from the computer made us jump. Days turned into a week. We started to lose hope. Maybe the email address was old. Maybe Jean-Luc thought it was a scam. Some crazy Americans trying to get, well, what would we be trying to get? It wasn't like Alistair was a millionaire. Then, one morning there it was, an email. Subject, Ray Alistair Dubois, votre père. Ray Alistair Dubois, your father. My French is non-existent, but Michael translated, his voice trembling slightly. It was from Jean-Luc. He said he was shocked, astounded. He confirmed Alistair Dubois was his father, and Annalise Vasseur his mother. He said his father had always been a man of secrets, a quiet, reserved man who spoke little of his past before settling in France. He'd known his father wasn't originally French, that he had another life before the war, but Alistair had never elaborated. Annalise, his mother, had passed away some years ago, taking many of those secrets with her. Sophie, his sister, lived in Canada now, married with her own family. Jean-Luc wrote that the photograph of Alistair and Annalise was one he knew well. It always sat on his mother's bedside table. But the photo of Alistair with Alara and Thomas, that had shaken him. He said his father sometimes had a distant, sad look in his eyes, especially when he thought no one was watching. Now, perhaps he understood why. He ended the email by saying he would like to talk, to learn more. He invited us to France. To his home France. I hadn't been on an airplane in 20 years, not since my dear wife Martha passed. The thought of crossing the Atlantic, meeting this whole new branch of the family, it was daunting. But the pull was too strong. This was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to unravel the mystery that had haunted our family for generations, to understand the man Alistair truly was. So we went. Me, Dad, Tom Jr., Michael, and Sarah. It felt like a pilgrimage. We flew into Paris, then took a train to Strasbourg, where Jean-Luc met us at the station. I was a bundle of nerves. What if he didn't like us? What if this was all a terrible mistake? When he stepped forward, a man a few years older than me, with kind eyes and hair more silver than dark, but with a familiar set to his jawline that reminded me so much of old photos of Grandpa Thomas. Well, any apprehension I had just melted away. He looked at us, a slow smile spreading across his, and said in heavily accented but clear English, "Welcome, welcome to my family." Lord have mercy, it was emotional. There were hugs, a few shed tears, mostly mine, I'll admit, and a sense of unreality hanging over everything. He drove us to his charming old farmhouse in the Alsatian countryside, a place Nestle, Nesl, generations of his wife's family had lived. His wife, Martine, was warm and welcoming, and soon we were all sitting around a big wooden table, laden with bread, cheese, and wine, talking as if we'd known each other for years. Jean-Luc told us about his father, Alistair, or Alexandre, as he was known to them in France. He'd been a loving but often distant father, a man who valued privacy and quiet. He'd worked as a translator and sometimes as a consultant for businesses needing discretion, using the skills he'd clearly honed during his Nightingale days. He'd never spoken of a first wife or another son, but Jean-Luc remembered his mother Annalise sometimes looking wistfully at maps of Scotland and America. He said Alistair passed away peacefully in his sleep in the late 1980s, never having returned to his homeland. Annalise had followed him about 10 years later. Then Jean-Luc paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. "My father," he said. "He left a box, much like yours, I think. He told me not to open it until I felt the time was right, or if someone came looking for him from his other life. Never understood what he meant until your email." My heart leaped. Another box? What secrets did this one hold? He led us into his father's old study, a small book-lined room, and there on a dusty shelf was a metal strongbox, clearly very old. "I haven't opened it since he died," Jean-Luc said, his voice subdued. I was afraid of what I might find." He produced a small, tarnished key from his pocket. The lock turned with a rusty click. Inside, there weren't many documents. But what was there was explosive. There were official-looking papers, some in English, some in French, some even in Russian, all stamped with classified or secret defense. These detailed aspects of Operation Nightingale, confirming its existence and Alistair's, or Alexandre's, deep involvement as a key operative, a facilitator, responsible for logistics and extraction routes. There were commendations, not just the strange metal we'd found, but others, from governments that had clearly wished to keep their involvement quiet. My great-grandfather wasn't just a rogue agent. He was a highly valued, if unofficial, asset. But then underneath these papers was a thick sealed manila envelope. On the front, in Alistair's familiar hand, was written, "For Thomas, my son, and for his children, to be opened only if we meet again, or if the world is a safer place." Jean-Luc looked at us, his eyes wide. This is for your grandfather, for your family." He handed the envelope to my father, Tom Jr. My dad's hands were shaking as he took it. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle, a message from Alistair directly to the son he'd left behind, a message that had waited decades to be read. What could it possibly say? What justification, what explanation could bridge all those years of silence and separation? We all held our breath as Dad carefully broke the seal. Inside, there wasn't just a letter. There was something else, something wrapped in oilcloth, something that felt heavy. My mind reeled. Money, gold, some long-lost treasure. From his spy days? The prompt I gave you for this story said if there was money in packages, it could only be revealed at the end. And folks, let me tell you, what was in that oilcloth package? It wasn't what any of us expected, not by a long shot, and it explained everything. But that, my friends, is a story for the final stretch. You'll want to stick around for this, I promise you. All right, folks, here we are at the heart of it all. My dad, Tom Jr., holding that thick manila envelope from his grandfather Alistair, a message across time. The air in Jean-Luc's cozy Alsatian study was so thick with anticipation, you could have cut it with a knife. We were all leaning in, practically holding our breath. I swear, you could hear a pin drop. Dad carefully unfolded the letter first. It was several pages long, written in Alistair's precise hand, dated just a few years before he passed away in the late 1980s. He must have known somehow that his time was coming, or perhaps he just felt the overwhelming need to finally set the record straight, even if only for posterity. He began by addressing Grandpa Thomas directly. With such love and regret, it brought tears to my eyes just hearing Dad read it aloud. "My dearest son Thomas," it started. "If you are reading this, then either a miracle has occurred and we have found our way back to each other, or more likely, the world has changed enough that my secrets no longer carry the same danger, and those you trust have sought the truth. I pray it is the latter, and that this letter finds you well and perhaps with a family of your own to share it with." He went on to explain, in stark detail, the true nature of Operation Nightingale. It wasn't just about rescuing a few people. It was a desperate, unsanctioned attempt to save key scientists and thinkers from falling into Soviet hands right after W2, people whose knowledge could tip the balance of power in the emerging Cold War. He confirmed Annalise had been his partner, a brilliant linguist and a fearless operative. They'd posed as husband and wife, a common tactic, and somewhere along the line, amidst the danger and the shared purpose, their cover had become their reality. He hadn't planned it, hadn't sought it, but love, as he wrote, blossoms in the ye. Stoniest of grounds, he then addressed the most painful part, his disappearance. It wasn't a choice he made lightly. Their network had been compromised. A high-level mole had betrayed them. Several members of their cell were captured, tortured, killed. Alistair and Annalise had barely escaped with their lives, thanks to a warning from a loyal contact. The order came down from a shadowy figure he only referred to as control. Disappear. Erase your past. For the safety of the network and for the safety of any family you have, you must cease to exist. He wrote of his agony, knowing he was abandoning Ilara and young Thomas. He said he'd wrestled with trying to contact them, to bring them to France, but the risk was too great. His enemies were ruthless and had long memories. Any contact could lead them to his first family, and he couldn't bear the thought of putting Ilara and Thomas in that kind of danger. So he made the impossible choice, to become Alexandre Dubois full-time, to build a new life with Annalise, and to pray that his son would grow up safe, even if it meant growing up without a father. I know this is a poor excuse for the pain I caused, Dad read, his voice thick with emotion. But know this, Thomas, not a day went by when I did not think of you, of your mother. I followed your life from afar, through discreet inquiries that were themselves a risk. I know you grew into a fine man. I am proud of you, prouder than words can say. It was overwhelming. The guilt, the love, the sheer weight of the sacrifices he'd made. It wasn't the act of a selfish man, but of someone trapped by circumstances, almost too horrific to imagine. My grandpa Thomas had died never knowing this full truth, though he must have carried Alistair's earlier cryptic letter and that strange, other nest comment like a stone in his heart. Then, Dad turned to the oilcloth-wrapped package. It was heavy, as I said, and flat. With trembling fingers, he untied the string and carefully unfolded the layers of stiff, greasy fabric. Inside, resting on a bed of more faded velvet, wasn't gold, or jewels, or stacks of cash. It was a collection of medals, real ones this time. A distinguished service order from the British, a Croix de Guerre from the French, even a Medal of Freedom from the Americans, awarded in secret, of course. And alongside them, a series of official-looking citations typed on government letterhead, detailing acts of incredible bravery, of lives saved, of crucial intelligence gathered during Operation Nightingale, and even, it seemed, during the latter parts of World War II itself. My great-grandfather, Alistair MacGregor, aka Alexandre Dubois, hadn't just been in a secret war. He'd been a decorated hero of several, his valor known only to a select few, his sacrifices buried under layers of secrecy. And there was one more thing in that oilcloth package, a small leather-bound ledger. When Dad opened it, we all gasped. It was a meticulously kept record of bank transfers, small, regular sums of money, sent discreetly over decades, through various intermediaries, to an account that Grandma Millie had apparently maintained. Not vast riches, but enough to have made a difference, to have eased burdens, especially in the early years after Alistair disappeared. The final entry was dated just before Alistair's death. So that's why Millie had the letters, the strange medal, the hidden box. Alistair had found a way, a very careful way, to support his first family, using Millie as his trusted conduit, his secret keeper. She must have carried that burden, that knowledge for most of her adult life, never breathing a word to her husband Thomas, or to anyone else. What incredible strength that must have taken. Bless her heart, she was more than just a keeper of linens. She was a guardian of an incredible, painful legacy. Jean-Luc was as stunned as we were. My father, he never spoke of such heroism, he said, his voice filled with awe and a new understanding. He was just Papa, quiet, private. It all made sense now. The secrecy, the disappearance, the second family, Millie's role. It was all part of a much larger, more complex tapestry than we could ever have guessed. Alistair hadn't abandoned his family out of malice or selfishness. He'd been forced into an impossible situation, making heartbreaking choices to protect the people he loved, on both sides of the ocean. We stayed with Jean-Luc and Martine for another week. We met Sophie via video call from Canada. Another emotional reunion. We shared stories, looked at old photographs, pieced together the two halves of Alistair's life. There was sadness, yes, for all the lost years, for the misunderstandings, but there was also an incredible sense of joy, of discovery, of family found. We weren't just the American MacGregors and the French Dubois anymore. We were one family, united by the extraordinary life of one very brave, very complicated man. Before we left, Jean-Luc gave my father Alistair's journal from the original box we found, the one detailing Operation Nightingale. This belongs with his medals, he said, with his first family, to whom he dedicated so much of his hidden life. And we left him the photograph of Alistair and Annalise, and the letters Alistair had written to Millie, so he could better understand the connection his father had maintained. Coming home was different. The world looked the same, but we were changed. That old cedar chest in Grandma Millie's house wasn't just a piece of furniture anymore. It was a treasure chest that had unlocked our family's entire history. Great-Grandpa Alistair was no longer a shameful whisper, but a hero whose story deserved to be told, to be honored. We had a small family gathering when we got back, with all my kids and grandkids. We laid out the medals, the letters, the photos. We told them the whole incredible story of Alistair MacGregor Dubois, the spy who loved two families, the hero who lived in the shadows. There were gasps, tears, and a whole lot of pride. He wasn't lost anymore, he was found. And you know that secret war he fought in? It might have been hidden from the history books, but its echoes resonated right down through our family, shaping us in ways we never knew until we dared to lift that false bottom. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other families out there have secrets tucked away, just waiting for the right moment or the right person to bring them into the light? So there you have it. The story of my 107-year-old, well, he would. The great-grandfather Alistair, the man who fought in a secret war, disappeared and ended up bridging two worlds, two families, across a vast ocean of secrets. It's a lot to take in, I know. But it brought us an incredible gift, a whole new family, and a peace that comes from finally understanding the truth. And what about you? Have you ever stumbled upon a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew? Or what would you have done in Great-Grandma Millie's shoes, keeping such monumental secrets for all those years? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed this trip down a very winding memory lane, do this old fella a favor and hit that like button, and maybe even subscribe for more tales from the family crypt. You never know what we might unearth next.